get to that this afternoon. So just to link where we were at, we were talking about various kinds of dealing with motivation questions. What drives people to be doing the things that they're doing and choosing the priorities that they have and trying to get some cues on how to get into that. I want to add a piece to that before we transition. And that is that part of getting to know what makes people choose and be motivated the way they do involves not only the individual, we focused on that earlier this morning, but also to be aware of the community and the context in which that person lives. And I don't just mean national context, though that applies, okay? But I'm thinking also in terms of social contexts, because people are not simply individuals, though we are individuals. But we are individuals that are part of communities, and communities and cultures have patterns of life. And those patterns of life contribute to the kinds of motivations that drive people. In other words, we're not entirely ourselves, we're not entirely part of a community and therefore pattern, but it's a mixture of both, and therefore the way people move and motivate is, we want to be aware of the bigger picture as well as the particular picture. So when I say communities, let me just list off some of the, I'm going to say broadly communities, what are some of the particular communities or communal groups that I'm thinking about here that will have a role in helping people decide to do whatever it is they tend to do in life and provide them with motivations. Let's start and work actually from the, if you will, the ground up. A person's family patterns are deeply embedded within people because that's the way they were brought up and socialized. It's what we call a primary socialization factor is one's family. And we all know that families are somewhat different in the way they are structured as well as in the way they tend to move, if you will. And I'm going to illustrate this from within my own North American context, as I touched on the other day. There are parts of America where basically family is described as one or two parents and the child, and there's not much around them because there's so much mobility in North American culture. The chances are whatever family you grew up with, you are not around them anymore. You've moved elsewhere. So your family is a fairly narrow circle of people, and again, often two parents and a child, but often just one parent and a child. Or increasingly we're finding, this is interesting in the area that I'm living in, family is described as a grandparent raising a grandchild because there has been some kind of deconstruction in the middle, and the parents have, for whatever reason, factored themselves out, and you have a grandparent raising a grandchild. New definition of family. So I'm leaving broadly what the family is, but whatever family structures a person grew up with tends to decide some of the patterns they make. I had an interesting experience. It was the opposite of what has been many of the people around the community I live in right now in Western Pennsylvania. I grew up knowing both parents, albeit they lived in two separate households, okay? And I barely ever saw my grandparents my entire life. It's a real loss, in my opinion. My mother's side of the family lived in England. My father's side of the family lived in Australia. These people over here never met these people over here, and we're moving all around the place, okay? So that's you know, I missed things like getting to know my grandparents, getting to know my cousins, that kind of thing. So that was my experience in family. There's some good, there's some bad to it. But take time as you get to try and find out, why is it that people do the things they do and choose the things they do? Ask yourself, how was that person raised? Okay? How was that person raised? Because the people and the patterns of their growing up years set a lot of expectations in their mind. They may be good or bad expectations, but the fact is that's what primarily influenced them. Okay, then I'm going to take another level here. Whatever that family context was, there was then the sort of, I'm going to call it broadly, the social contexts of choice. I'll explain what I mean by that. The social contexts of choice also play a significant role in understanding how people pattern and choose and make the priorities that they have in their life. In other words, we would say perhaps a good look at their peers. People are influenced by the older generation to a degree, of course. However, people also learn by the time they are teenagers, and maybe much before then, but certainly by the time they're young teenagers, there is a lot of shaping going on because of the people they choose to socialize with. We have this expression, peer pressure. Sometimes peer pressure is constructive, sometimes it's not. And of course, though we don't really get to choose our family, we do to a large degree get to choose our peers. A couple of examples, okay? Whatever activities one's peers choose to do are probably what you're also choosing to do. So we have, for example, let's say young teenagers who really like sports, whatever sport is. And so they play the sport with this group of peers, but then they also tend to do social events other than sports, but with their sporting peers. Okay? Musical. I happen to be one of these people growing up. I played a couple of instruments, and a lot of my peer group, when I was a young teenager, happened to be musical people. Okay? So the events they were doing, the directions they were going, a lot of that was mine as well. Okay? Is that good or bad? Well, it depends on the individual. But that shaped a lot of my expectation. The people that were speaking into my life, peers, were people that had a particular view of the way life works. And so I imbibed some of their values and patterns. And that went into my motivations. By the way, I actively did music all the way through college. After that, I was pretty busy with other things, but it played a major role in my life in that way. We then have, let's go a bit further, whatever educational groups that people hang out with, they tend to influence our motivations. Here's a real simple example. It's a pattern. It's not always true, but it's a pattern. If a person's education ends at high school, now I'm going to speak for North America. If a person's education ends at high school, it is quite possible that when they get married, if they choose to do so, and most people do, doesn't mean they have to, but just most do, it is quite possible they will marry someone they went to high school with. Now, you may say that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's the pattern. Okay? Someone who goes to college, quite likely, will only marry someone who has at least a college education. You see the pattern, right? By the way, another general pattern, I'm not saying this is always true, but often, women marry upward. Okay? I'm not saying good or bad, I'm just making an observation. For many societies, women marry upward. Their concern is, what does he bring to the table in the broad sense of his personal, as well as financial, as well as educational, as well as professional resources? What does he provide? It's a natural question to ask. Because in many ways, and I observe this often in colleges, I'll be specific to Western example here. When a woman who is very, very good at college and very, very smart and very competent, believe it or not, she's the one who'll have the harder time trying to decide what to do after college. It's interesting. She has all these resources, But the greater degree of, if you will, crises that young adults have after college, it's often the women who have the crisis, personal crisis. The men say, I've got to get a job. They may want to, they may not want to, but their obligation to themselves, I'm going to go get a job or go get more education. The women are more likely to say, well, first off, who am I going to be spending my life with? What if I start education and then I end up deciding to go with this guy over here and he's going that direction and I want to go this direction? It's a more complicated situation. So I watch for college-educated, very, very highly educated women. This is often presenting a set of challenges, ironically, greater challenges, because of their greater levels of ability. So educational pictures bring some motivational questions to the table as well. We're going to add here, this is kind of obvious, but this, your job, your employment, your profession, whatever you want to call it, tends to bring you into contact with a lot of people who then have certain values and value systems that are then sometimes the value systems that become your value system. I'll give you a couple examples. Okay. I had a student, actually this kind of story has played out a lot. I'm going to give you just one example. I had a student who was an engineering major. A few years back, an engineering major. And he was in the middle of the school years. He had 4 years of school, but he had a crisis. And his crisis was he didn't want to stay an engineering major. He wanted to become a biblical studies major. Good, I thought I was excited, okay. Problem, his father was a very highly educated and competent physician. His father was a doctor. And the father was pressuring the son quite intensely. If you're going to spend money on your education, you need to go into engineering or you need to go into medicine or your education is not worth it. And the son struggled hard. I'll tell you why. He respected his father. That's the good news, okay? But the father was pushing him in a direction where the son just didn't have that conviction. And this was a careful thing to steer because I don't want to teach young adults to disrespect their parents. That's a dangerous pattern. On the other hand, whatever decisions the child is making here as a young adult are going to tend to have effects down the road. And I said to him, are you absolutely, absolutely sure you want to spend your life in the whatever biblical studies opens up for you, okay? Are you sure that's what you want to do? Because if you're going to politely resist the motivational patterns of your father, all right, you better be awful sure that you're doing the right thing. And I laid it on his shoulder. I thought, this young man has to own this decision. It's tough. Now, I'll tell you what happened. This is a happy story, by the way. He decided he would respectfully go into the biblical studies direction. He trained to be a missionary. He married a fellow student who's a very, very competent student. They have, I think, they have 3 or 4 kids now, and they spent a number of years overseas in missions. Very successful. In 2 different countries, if I remember correctly. They're now temporarily back home taking care of aging parents who are struggling with health. But the time is going to come when they're going to be going again in the direction of ministry. The point is the people he chose to be around and socialize with influenced his set of values, reaffirmed them in many ways, but also helped shape the choice patterns and the motivation patterns that he was making. I tell you many, many stories like that, but that's one that was, I think, a happy one, albeit it was a challenging one for reasons that I think are quite evident. So being aware of the, if you will, the different voices that speak into one's life, you want to be able to see these kinds of communities of context, from family to the choice groups that a person makes. I want to tell you one more story. This is a funny one, and I love this. I hope you like this too. I was actually at a wedding. I was at a friend's wedding, and I was sitting at a table. We were eating snacks at a reception, and there were 3 or 4 guys at the table. I didn't know any of these guys, and they were obviously close friends, and they were professionals working somewhere. And I said to one of the guys, I said, I don't know who you are. I don't know your name. I don't know anything about you, but the way you guys are talking and joking with each other, I'm guessing one of you is an engineer. And he goes, oh yeah. He said, we're all engineers. I said, okay. I said, you guys have a very unique way of thinking. And he said, you have no idea. Okay, I said, oh good. I said, tell me. All right. He goes, let me tell you a story. He said, I went to school with all these guys. We were all friends since college. All right. We were all engineering majors. And they were very, like, you know, high-profile kind of guys. And he said, we made a pact when we were college students. And the pact, this is an agreement between this group, that whoever was the second last guy in their circle to get married had to pull a super stunt at the wedding of the last guy to get married. Okay? And the guy who's talking to me was the second last guy, right? He gets married, and then there's one guy who's left who hasn't yet married. And it's his job to pull the stunt at this guy's wedding. Now, this guy, the final guy to get married, made a big mistake. His mistake was his choice of the best man at his wedding was this guy here, which set him up to do something horrible. Okay? So he says, here's what I did. He said, I was the best man. And here's what happened. The wedding starts, and the event is going on. And it comes time to pass the rings. You know, the husband and the wife are going to give each other rings. And he says, the groom, the guy getting married, turns to me and is looking for the ring. And he says, and I pack down my suit. And I go, you know, like this, all right? And then everyone's kind of nervous, like, what's going to happen next? And then he reaches back into his suit and he pulls out a box of Cracker Jacks. I don't know if you want to, do you have Cracker Jacks here? It's basically a box of sweetened popcorn. Okay? All right, yeah. And he has doctored the box. They don't know that. But he pulls out this box of Cracker Jacks and he holds it up so everyone at the wedding can see the box of Cracker Jack. I'm like, what's going on here? And he tears it open. Now, he's already played with it. He tears it open, pours some into his hand and starts eating them, pours Cracker Jacks into the groom's hand, who now has, we're trying to get married to this woman. And he's got Cracker Jacks, so he pops them in his mouth and eats those. And he reaches back into the box, and he pulls out a napkin, and he opens up the napkin, and ta-da! There's the ring. And I said, what happened next? And he said, well, he said, in the whole room, a sea of men's voices went, oh. And right after that, a sea of women's shoes under the pews kicking the guys. And I said, what did the bride think about all of this? And he said, she was so angry at me, she wouldn't talk to me for the rest of the day. I said, I can't blame her. And then he claims that since that day, that's all she has talked about. Okay? So I thought, this guy chose some interesting friends, right? Now, this was a fun kind of thing. I'm not saying you should do this. I'm just saying you can see how your social group patterns with you, but you pattern with the group. And when you see all these people making decisions of this kind and motivations of this or that kind, it's going to influence you, and your communities of value then shape the way you're thinking. Now, I'm going to put a little bit of a line here to talk about a few other communities of value, and I'm going to try and tilt this a little bit towards the Kenyan context, but I'm going to start first with the Western context. Okay? We realize that generations have patterns. Okay? And the older I get, the more I'm very conscious of this. I am not saying right now any one pattern is right or wrong. I'm just saying patterns tend to emerge. Okay? A real simple example, when I was a young adult, a teenager, young adult, my people were interested in getting their license to drive a car as soon as possible. All right? I got my license, I think I was 16 years old when I was driving a car, and if we could, we would own a car. Now, maybe a terrible car, it might be a wreckage of a car, but we tried to at least own a car to get around. Okay? Very interesting when I started having kids. It was very, very different. For whatever reasons, their pattern was not to get to drive early, but just hope that your parents would drive you places. Now, I don't know what's better, what's worse. I'm just saying you could see pattern changes. You could see pattern changes. You could see pattern changes by gender. Many men were tending to make certain kinds of motivated changes in this way or that. Many women were tending to do some other things. The generation in which you live tends to see things a certain way. Each generation, I'm suggesting, has its wisdom and its blind spots. I'm suggesting they're both in there. Each generation has its wisdom and it has its blind spots. And that's why we need to know people that are older than us and younger than us, so that we can question ourselves in light of their wisdom, knowing a mixture of their wisdom and my own, and my blind spots may be something I want to be aware of. Generations make pattern differences and have different sets of motivations. Okay, by the way, another real simple example of a generational pattern. Okay, my generation has tended, at least in many cases, to work a job, and then if we want to work a different job, we go looking for a job, and then we don't quit the first job until we've got the second job lined up. My children's generation is more likely to say, I'm tired of doing this job. They quit the job, they're unemployed for a while, and then when they're ready, they go looking for another job. Not the way I prefer to do it. I think I'm always better. But I'm just saying, pattern differences. And so I have to look for those things and be aware that this also is a, if you will, it's an invisible community. Generations are hard sometimes to define. Okay? I'm what's called the tail end of the baby boomer generation. I was born basically in the decade or so after World War II. And we have patterns, and some of them are good and some of them are not. By the way, my generation in the West, by and large, walked away from their Christian faith and walked away from the church. And then many of us found our faith, or it came to us. That's probably a better way to put it. God found me just in time, because I think I was not going in some good directions. The new generation has a concept. I don't know if this applies to Kenya. I'm not sure. So let me describe what we're hearing, because this is a very loud voice in America right now. Young adults will say things like this of themselves: I'm a spiritual person, but I am not a religious person. Okay? They're telling me a couple things when they say that. They're saying things like, I'm fed up with the church. They're claiming maybe the church has hurt them, maybe it has, okay? They're saying, I'm aware that there's something bigger than me, okay? But they're also saying, I do not want to be part of a community of fellowship. I want to live individually and individualistically. That's a very loud generational difference. And with more comment on it, you're on.
What I hear is hypocrisy. They don't like the hypocrisy of the church. And I'm going to address some of the things that we talk about. Some of the things that you asked about. Okay? So when we talk about the LGBTQIQ community, we talk about teenage pregnancies, we talk about sex before marriage, we talk about living in sin, those types of issues. We tend to pick sins to target. Whose church targets every sin that happens? Or do we select certain sins that we want to target and pick out and pick apart? Say that again.
We hardly address all of them.
You equally address all of them.
We
We hardly. I'm sorry.
Hardly.
I thought you said equally. I was like, that's a miracle.
We there.
Rarely do we address all of those things equally. Okay? So, what did Jesus say about the woman who's about to be stoned?
did they?
No. No.
No.
No. Okay. So the younger generation sees us throwing stones. They see us targeting sin unequally. And they fail to see us modeling the love of Jesus Christ. That's at least in the United States. And so they want to be in contact with God. So they'll be in nature. They'll meditate. Okay. They will try to find themselves. But they don't want to be a part of something that they view as being hypocritical. If that resonates with you guys, then think about the direction your church is taking. Are you modeling the love of Jesus Christ?
I think we'll probably end up circling back to this in a couple points in the days ahead. But I'm going to continue adding to this. So generational differences, we got that. I'm going to suggest there are also, I'm going to just put the word postmodern. I know this is a bit low on the board, but I'm just writing the word postmodernism, and I'm not going to systematically study it, but I want to mention a couple features of what is a prevailing philosophical social trend. Okay, it's not a religion, it's not a philosophy, but it's a trend. Postmodernism is a description of a societal pattern that believes in all things are relative. There's no absolute truth. Okay? The groups can have their personal truth. There is no overarching truth. Okay? Which is kind of scary because the Bible at least speaks in many ways about overarching truths. For example, take an obvious one, belief in God, belief in a supreme God, belief in a triune or trinitarian God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. These are presented as big truths, right? Whereas postmodernism says there are no big truths. There's only your particular society's or your particular culture's truths. Those are true for you. No, that's fine. But don't ever think that they're true for anybody else. Postmodernism has a lot of dangers like that. It gives us a couple of opportunities that are good, but it also presents some dangers. So we have, growing up now in the West, I don't know the degree to which it affects society here, but in the West, people who, for a variety of reasons, including what's happening with technology and artificial intelligence today, are wondering, can I really believe anything? Can I believe any person? Because everything seems to be synthesized and created by imagination, but not genuinely real. So we're facing a society there where almost, not quite but almost, people have no belief in anything. They don't care. Right? That's just a little corner of postmodernism. And the other one, I'm going to write just one more word on the board here. Here's what I don't know, so I'm going to put it as a question mark. The degree to which in Kenya, one's tribal association sets the patterns of choice and motivation and expectation. I know it has to have some role in there. I just don't know the degree to which that role exists and plays a part in people's motivations and patterns of choice. So I don't know if you have any particular comments on this that would help me. You're welcome to make them right now, but you don't have to. But if you want to, my ears are always open for this, because this is a part of your society I know so little about. Does anyone want to make? You don't have to. If you want to make a comment on this, the degree to which one's tribal legacy influences the kinds of patterns of choices that they tend to make. Yeah, no, okay. Oh, wait, am I correct? One of your tribes noted for its significant mobility is the Kikuyu. I've been told Kikuyu people tend to travel a lot. Is that true or not? I know, seriously, that's what I've been told. Is that true? Yeah. Kikuyu people tend to travel and move a lot. Yeah, okay. Oh, so we'll take that as one example. That may be something that plays into the motivations and decision-making of people, some people more than others. Okay? Yeah. By the way, my background, my tribe is Australian. Sort of, all right? Australians tend to travel a lot because Australia is on the southern side of the world, far away from other societies. It's a British-born society, but Britain's in the other northern hemisphere on the other side of the world. Australians tend to feel very isolated from much of the world historically, and so they tend to travel. Well, my father did. Travel. He went to multiple countries, and that's why I grew up all these different places. That's a pattern. Okay. American young adults today are often afraid of the world. And I don't know if you caught this. I think it was yesterday or the day before, Regina commented that there were people who she works with who said to her, don't go to Africa, you know, it's a dangerous place, you know, something horrible is going to happen to you. That's true for many Americans. They're afraid of the world, right? It's interesting. By the way, much of the world is afraid of America. So we know that. And America's afraid of America sometimes as well.
They said the same thing when I went to Australia.
Yeah, well, that's right. Australians are dangerous people. They're all criminals. We know that.
No,
Yeah.
they were more worried about the bugs and the insects and all the animals that try to kill you.
Yeah, that's quite true. Good motivation. Danger everywhere. There's a very funny video on YouTube. It's a song that two people made up. And the song says, come to Australia, you might accidentally get killed. Okay? And it shows all the different animals that can. Anyway, I've made my point. I've made my point simply that as we counsel people, we need to be aware that there are a lot of factors playing into their patterns of choices and the motivations they have to do the various things that they do. And a wise pastoral counselor is going to reflect on as many of these things as they can, and this means taking time to get to know people, right? Taking time to get to know people. This is a high demand on many pastors, and many feel the pressure of it. A lot of pastoral work is done behind the scenes, and it involves a lot of reflection and care. And this is one of the big areas for that. Lots of factors go into the making of personal choices and the forming of motivations for various aspects of life. So thinking about these things, and I'm going to mention one more that's kind of an easy one. I won't write on the board. But do you realize, to a degree, the kind of church that a person chooses to participate in is, to some degree, a church that has a personality like themselves. In fact, if I go to a church, maybe I have some friends there, but their behavior patterns, I'll give you a real simple example. I'll make it a black and white kind of example. I go to a church that's very expressive and very emotional, very articulate. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of, for example, dancing, singing, movement, and so forth. But I'm from a country and a culture that is very self-contained and sort of reserved and very determined with a kind of an organization. I'm going to hesitate about being in one of these churches, and these people are going to hesitate about being in one of those churches because their personalities are different. And that was helpful. I had a professor in seminary, the same man I was quoting the other day, who said, to a degree, a person's denominational and church patterns, church association, reflect their own personality. Be aware of that. And I'll leave it at that. So that's what I wanted to explore. I'm going to start to transition in a moment to the next topic, but I want to just pause in case there's any, I want to give you an opportunity to reflect on this if you'd like to, and have anything you would like to say before I jump into the next topic. And I have just a few minutes to get a foothold. Let me get a microphone for you, and your power.
I think the subject of motivation is very important to us, especially the pastors. As you have said, it is very difficult to know the motivation of an individual. And therefore, sometimes you as a pastor, you can have a project in the church. Maybe you want to build a church, you want to do something else. But when you seek for the support from the members of your church about that particular project, it becomes very difficult. People just look at you, they don't give, they are not interested. So in such cases, what are you supposed to do? Because the subject of motivation, it is even affecting how we preach. Even in this country, how we preach. Sometimes we deviate from the truth so that we can motivate people with something else, so that they can give money for the project or for the upkeep of the pastor. So when you are sharing with us about that, I was thinking, which is the right way as a man of God and a woman of God can you use to motivate your people biblically, according to the Bible, according to the truth, so that they can fully support you in what you're doing in ministry?
I'll give you a couple thoughts. This is not a total answer. I don't have a total answer, but I will give a couple thoughts relevant to what you said. So, first thought. When there's a valuable project, letting people know about it and encouraging support for it is a good thing. It is a good thing. That's first thought. And we don't really get support until other people can be sufficiently informed, okay? But also, they have to be convinced within themselves that this is something that is their priority. Now, this is tricky. Imagine for a second, we'll call this a particular congregation, which is within my hands here. Congregation A, we'll call it, all right? And the project that any one person has may or may not be that the other people have. Let me take one step away for a minute from the pastor. You said that the pastor is trying to support this. Let's start with just a church member for just a second. You know, sometimes a church member is involved in a community service, a community ministry, and they're really good at it, they're deeply involved in it. Does that necessarily mean that that has to be the ministry of all the other people in the church? No, it doesn't, right? Because all of us have our connections and our burdens for different aspects and different persons of our communities. Now, there may be a whole group of people in the church who have it on their heart to do that. But it may just be that one person. And then this other person over here in the community has an involvement, but that's particular to them. Now, I'm going to come back, okay? So, if a pastor is trying to get their church to be involved in a project, maybe a building project, they have to be sure that it's not just themselves saying, we need this, but it has to be genuinely concerned and make sure that all the people, or at least a major number of the people, believe this to be their burden. Because if the people of the church and the other, particularly the other leaders within the church, in the tradition I'm part of, we usually call them elders, okay? That the elders of the church have to be convinced that's important, or else it's only the pastor's burden. Yeah, I'm not saying the pastor's right or wrong, I'm just saying it has to be shared within the leadership of the church together, so that the leadership together can say, we believe this is a priority, and then see if they can bring people together. One more specific example. I have a friend who was involved in sort of a rebuilding process of a church that had a lot of difficult years. And some of the windows of the church were broken. I think just the weather had damaged them. Okay? They needed to be fixed. And there was a group of people in the church called deacons. The deacons were responsible for the church building. None of the deacons was willing to fix the window. And I said to my pastor friend, so what did you do about that? He said, nothing. I said, oh, okay, why? He goes, well, because, he said, I could fix the window, but it had to become the responsibility of those who claimed it was their responsibility in the first place. And eventually, guess what? It was taken care of. That was good. The church rose to the occasion because together they went, yep, that's our responsibility. We need to fix this window. And I would say the same would go with building project. It has to be the conviction of the community that this is important to us. Thoughts? I'll be quiet for you to have.
Thank you. I completely agree with what Dr. Watt said. And I have seen firsthand congregation members who are complaining about their pastors. We need to grow, we need to build this bigger church so people come. Is that, and people are shaking their head, yes. Okay. Okay. But they're asking themselves, at what cost? We don't have the people to fill up this bigger church. Could we not spend the money on more mission for people in the community, more needs for people in the community, as opposed to saying, look at us at the big church we have? So, the question is, what need? Now, if you need a bigger building because you want to build an education center for the local children, and there's a need for that, and everybody agrees that there's a need for that, then that's valuable. But if it's a look at me moment, look how prosperous we are, look how well we're doing, okay? If it's a pride thing, if it's a simple thing, and I'm not saying it is, but we have to assess where our needs are at. Our mission to come here, our calling to come here, is not the same calling as our churches have. Our churches are worried about their local community, as they should be. As they should be. They support us with prayer, with well wishes, with messages and concerns as we travel. Okay. But their calling is not our calling here.
Oh, please. This is on, so hopefully
Thank you. I want to share something. Actually, to me, it's like a testimony I'm sharing concerning the same thing we are talking about that just happened just 2 weeks ago. In our church, in our local church there, I serve as one of the district church leadership in the district church leadership as the district secretary in the setup of our church. And there was a project that as a district we wanted to carry out, and it was a very important one in our lives. And it needed a lot of money, some reasonable amount of money. So our district has a total of 12 churches. So we communicate to the pastors who every month come together. We call it district council meeting every month. So this project took 3 years to raise that amount of money, but money was not coming at all. And being the secretary of the district, at the moment, our overseer, it happened that he was somehow sick, so for more than a year now, I'm the one holding the district office. So now being in the position, in the leadership position, and this project was started by my overseer, and it is not working. It really ate up my mind. It really disturbed me. What can I do for this project to work? So I went on my knees and asked God for wisdom to help me, because I was committed to see this project work. I didn't want the overseer to see that I did not work. I was not committed to ensure the project he was working on failed. So it really ate up my mind, and I dwelt in prayer for 3 good years, trying to raise that amount of money that was needed. It was not forthcoming. Now, after prayer, God gave me wisdom. What I did, I called the executive council, and we summoned the pastors to come to the pastors, each pastor to come with 2 church elders without fail for a special council meeting. Normally, it is the pastors that come. But this time, I called each pastor to come with the church elders. Why did I do that? I thought maybe it is because the pastor goes there, but the elders, to them, that is not a priority, or rather it's not their motivation. So I tried to do that in order maybe to inject this project into them, to try and see how they will pick it. And that meeting succeeded. And number of people came, and that number, the attendance had not been recorded in any meeting. They came in numbers. So again, I kept asking myself, why did they come in such big numbers? Unexpectedly, because it's overwhelming. I thought maybe they're coming to put this project down. But by God's grace, slowly but slowly trying to explain the overseer's idea in this project, I saw people started nodding their heads. It's like they're not picking it up. Now guess what? After that meeting, we came up together with them, with the church leaders and pastor. They came with a strategy to fundraise. And I tell you, the money that we struggled for 3 years to raise, I'm telling you, it was raised in 1 month. 1 month.
Amen.
And the project succeeded. Now, I agree with what you're saying, and that is why I was triggered to share this testimony. That what you're saying is true. Your motivation will not be their motivation. So there are sometimes we really need to ask God to understand, because sometimes it's difficult to discern, to understand the people's motivation, unless sometimes we need divine intervention. Thank you.
And can I add, I love what you said. It addresses this. I want to just add a variant on this. At one point in my life, I was called to work with a church that was larger than the church I had been serving with. It was a larger group. And I was promised, when you come, if you become a pastor, we will call an associate pastor because we need a greater staff. While I was there in the years ahead, we never succeeded in calling an associate pastor. It just didn't work. I eventually moved on to another job. I got unhappy. I wish we could have called a second pastor. And about a couple of years after I moved on, it succeeded in the next round. And they ended up getting actually 3 or 4 pastors, which was interesting. I don't know why, because I think I was ready for it. I think we were ready for it. For whatever reason, I don't understand, at least in my season of service, it was not going to be. Next season came, and that just, the floodgates opened. It was very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah.
I think, and I could be wrong about this because I wasn't part of that, sometimes when I'm a person, and I think Dr. Watt is a person also that needs to make sure things are done. And so we make sure things are done. We stay up late, we get up early, we make sure things are done. Not everybody, and I'm not criticizing this, not everybody feels that. there are people that'll say, my workday's done. And they have a much healthier work-life balance than what I do. But I think congregations will respond to that. If they see something isn't getting done, then they'll hire a second pastor. But if we always make sure that everything's done,
Then it's not needed.
it's not needed. Okay? And once again, I'm not criticizing one or the other. I'm not criticizing myself, or I'm not criticizing the person that says my workday's done, because they probably are much healthier than I am.
Good point.
So I don't want to say that, but congregations respond to what they see as a need, not necessarily what we see as church leaders as a need. And we have to understand that difference. And the timing, we may suggest something now, and they're not ready. They might be ready 5 years from now. They might be ready 10 years from now. And they might never be ready. Seed planting. Seed planting. I've mentioned that before. I'll probably mention it again. Okay? Because we're called to plant a seed. Apollos watered it. God made it grow.